Hi, and welcome back to our channel. So if you are new here, my name is Emily, and we make recovery videos for severe anxiety, DPDR, agoraphobia, panic disorder, all that kind of stuff. So if you are not new here, you're probably used to me filming in my car. So today I wanted to sit down and film just a longer video talking in depth about exactly what I went through, exactly what my symptoms were, and what I did to recover. So up until this point, I've just kind of filmed some 5-minute videos here and there chatting about it, but today I'm going to lay out all of the details. So if you are struggling with this and you have not already, please subscribe to this channel. We post videos typically at least weekly. And we also have a link to our private Facebook community that's in the description to this video, as well as our free recovery guide. And let me just say, this guide is 100% free. There's nothing for you to buy within the guide. This is going to lay out everything that you need to recover. And if you go through the guide and you need some extra accountability, I do offer coaching as well, which is also in that link in the description. So, all right, I've got my notes here on my laptop in front of me, but I just want to talk about exactly what happened. So I fell into the cycle literally overnight. It was December 8th, 2021. I will never forget that day. And prior to December, I kind of want to just talk about maybe some warning signs that I could have seen in retrospect, although if you had told me that this would happen, I would not have believed you. So honestly, I don't know if anything would have been different, right? So prior to December, I had, I guess you can call it a panic attack, technically, 3 months before that, so October. And prior to that, I had had a lot of stress going on, a lot of work stress, good stress, bad stress, traveling, just literally never taking a break, physically, mentally, emotionally. And in October, I had gone and I'd actually gotten lip injections, just random thing, right? I had done this before many times. I don't do that anymore, which is honestly kind of irrelevant. I don't really care if people get them or don't get them, but I just decided to not do that anymore. But in October, I went and I got my lip injections, and I had only drank like coffee that day. And I was my typical lifestyle, right, of just going hard, pushing myself, like not really taking a break, not really like eating lunch. And I had settled down to cook dinner. We were having some friends over. And I just felt this like weird feeling of, I was technically derealization at the time. I did not know what it was. And when I was cooking dinner, I was not stressed out. You know, I was actually de-stressing. And I was listening to music, and I was just like making some spaghetti or something. And then all of a sudden I felt this derealization, I felt tunnel vision, I felt like super out of it, out of control, just really scared. And so I called my husband and I was like, I don't know what's happening, but we have to go to the emergency room. And so this was my first panic experience. I went to the ER and they were like, I don't know. And like in my head, I was thinking, was it like the lip injections? Am I having some crazy reaction that I've never had? Like, what is going on? And so they were like, I don't think it's that. Take a Benadryl, like, who knows? So I went home, I was fine. And the next day I woke up and I was normal again, right? I wasn't having any symptoms. So I kept going, and we kept traveling. We kept with not sleeping enough and just honestly like overdoing it. Lots of stress going on in some other areas. And fast forward to December. So December 8th, 2021, I go in for a scheduled gallbladder removal. Let me note that I've had surgeries prior to this. I'd never had any issues with surgeries. And I go in for my surgery. I was nervous, of course. Like, I don't love anesthesia. It's a weird concept, but nothing crazy. And so I wake up from surgery and literally a switch flipped, like from that day moving forward. And this was for literally like over a year of like solid 24/7 symptoms. So I wake up and I remember being in the operating room and I was under like groggy from anesthesia. And I was telling them something's not right. I need to stay here. I don't feel good. I feel like something's wrong. And they were like, look, just sleep it off, like you're fine, go home. If you don't go home now, you never will. So I got in the car with my husband, of course, passenger, and I remember telling him, I was like, I want to stay here. I want to stay in the parking lot. Something's very wrong. And so we stayed there for a few minutes. And then finally I was like, okay, let's just go home and I'm going to sleep. So, and this was all like while I was half out of it, right? So I go home and I try to sleep. And my first symptom that I felt was this weird insomnia. And I was drugged. I was not only half anesthetized or whatever the word is, but I also had pain medication. So I was trying to sleep. All that stuff should definitely make you sleep, and instead my body was jolting me awake. And I would like kind of doze off, and I would feel like this, it's irrational, I knew that, but my body didn't care. And I felt like if I let myself drift off to sleep, it was the same thing as like letting yourself die. Like that's the best way to describe it. And if you've experienced it, you understand what I'm saying. So I was drifting off, my body was jolting me awake, I could not sleep. This went on for days. After that first day, I was like, no more pain meds, I wanna be in it again, I don't wanna feel this way. So after the first day, I was off pain meds. The symptoms were not going away. I wrote down some notes here of symptoms, and I'm just gonna list them off, and then I'm gonna talk about what happened next, so bear with me. I had the weird insomnia. I had this feeling of being stoned or drugged, even though I was not, and I will basically have later found out that was essentially DPDR, or depersonalization and derealization, which is also an anxiety symptom, a nervous system sensitization symptom, which we'll get into, but I had that. I was having heart palpitations and PVCs, which is that like skipped beat feeling. I was having elevated heart rate. I was having low heart rate. I was having all kinds of weird things there. Honestly, I was just focusing on it, so I was like super aware of what was happening. Dizziness, lightheadedness, feeling like I was going to pass out literally 24/7 for over a year straight. Feeling off balance or like kind of swaying sensations. I didn't have like your classic room spinning vertigo. I think I had that maybe one time throughout all of this, but it was more of this like persistent dizziness type of feeling, which I made a video on. It's called PPPD, which you can look at. But anyway, so I had this just weird dizziness type of feeling. I had nausea, I had vomiting, I had all kinds of other fun GI symptoms. I had shaking and tremors, and I also had this internal shaking type of feeling. Like I felt like I was like literally shaking on the inside is the best way to put it, which again, if you have experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. Hot flashes or hot flushes is the best way to put it. Like I would be sitting there and I would just feel this rush of heat kind of like come up. It was almost like through here on up. And then I would panic because I'm like, what's happening, right? So I had that. I had vision changes, including floaters, tunnel vision, blurred vision, etc. I had like depth perception issues. Like I would look out and just everything looked so wrong, which I guess I could lump into DPDR, but at the end of the day, and you'll see as I continue to talk about this, it's all one thing, which is your nervous system. Anyway, light and sound sensitivity. I remember my husband, if he would flip on a light switch, I would get chills. So my body was just so overreactive. I had extreme light sensitivity, sound distortion, and I don't know if that was literally sound distortion or if it was the fact that I was so anxious because of everything that was happening. And if I would hear something and I'd be like, did I hear that wrong? And then I would kind of like freak out. So there was that going on. Headaches, pressure, constant pressure in my head, which I'll get into in a little bit too. Insomnia or sleeping too much. I had both, kind of like it waxed and it waned. Chronic fatigue, to the point where I was anxious about how tired that I was because it wasn't normal and I was 27 and why was I so flippin' tired? And it was a weird kind of tired. It was like the kind of tired that you feel like you're just gonna randomly fall asleep. So there was that. High blood pressure, low blood pressure, tightness in my throat, feeling like there was hands around my neck and a lump in my throat. I could not get a full breath. I would literally be on my knees like all the time. or just like panting. Numbness, tingling, weird sensations, especially up in here, which now I'll say was a lot of tension. Feeling wired but tired. Feeling like I was exhausted and anxious, but I had had 75 cups of coffee, which I definitely was not drinking coffee at this time. And then with all the physical symptoms, I had emotional and mental symptoms, of course, right? So I was having weird thoughts, scary thoughts. Like, for example, I have no reason to think that I would ever do anything crazy, but of course, when you're feeling this way, the adrenaline is going to manifest in thoughts. So for example, if I would walk past like the kitchen knife set, I would get scared because like, what if I, grab the knife and do something? I would pretty much anything, right? Like if I didn't drive for many months, we'll talk about, but when I started driving, I would just imagine like me having a seizure, which I've never had a seizure before. I would imagine like crashing the car very vividly or whatever it was. I could literally list off a billion intrusive thoughts. And then like feelings of hopelessness and bouts of deep sinking depression feelings. And this is not lingering depression for me. It was literally like this feeling that would hit me in my stomach and then it would fade away. And it was just this like, oh, what was that? That was horrible. And it was usually happen like in the middle of the night. And the hopelessness was just kind of a general like, this is never gonna end. And the more time went on, the more that hopeless feeling, was happening. So that's my list of symptoms. I'm gonna talk more in depth about those symptoms in a minute, but I just wanted to list them off. This was from day 1. So probably day 2 or 3, I was going to not only the ER, but my primary doctor, who is now no longer my primary doctor. And I went in with my husband, and my heart rate was probably 130, which is really high for me. My blood pressure was high. I was like, oh, something's wrong. Something happened with the anesthesia. What happened to me? And she's like, you're anxious. You need to see a psychiatrist. Like, literally, I'm not exaggerating the tone. And actually, no, what she said was, you're young, you're healthy, you're perfectly fine, you're anxious, you need to see a psychiatrist. That's what she said. And I just cried and I was like, what is happening? Like, this is not anxiety. And I definitely did not believe that anxiety had anything to do with this for many, many months into this process. So that was my experience with her. She was like, do you want an antidepressant? Like, what do you want? And it was just like, it was like the worst blow off of all time. And to this day, I wish I could write her a letter. I just don't care enough to do it. And I've learned enough emotional regulation and energy and things like that. But yeah, I mean, many doctors, unfortunately, don't get it from like a very practical level unless they've been through it. So yeah, it's anxiety, take some medicine, you'll be fine. And it's just unfortunately not that simple many times. And it is very scary when you're going through it. So I did at that point get a referral to a psychiatrist because I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll see one. It's not anxiety. This referral was, I believe, 8 months out. So there was no quick visit to a psychiatrist, by the way, which is even worse. At that point, she had prescribed me, I believe it was Lexapro, and I did not take it for many months until I decided to because I was terrified of taking any medicine. Even though I had taken medicine in the past, just random medicines, I was so scared of feeling any more out of control, any more out of it. And even she prescribed me Xanax and I would break it into half. I would take it and then I would panic because I was like, what's happening to me? Because I didn't know what was going on. And anyway, so that was that. Now, pretty much a couple months of the same exact thing, going into the ER literally multiple times a week and getting told to go home. I was fine. With no real test, honestly, either, which I had a lot of testing done throughout this journey, and I'll talk about it. But at that time, they weren't doing enough, in my opinion, at the time, to feel secure that I was actually safe. So I would go to the ER, they would be like, here's some Benadryl or some Ativan or something, like, do you want medicine? And then I felt like they thought I was this like medication-seeking, hypochondriac, right? So that was that. After a couple months of many ERs, every urgent care in town, so I could talk to different doctors and get different doctors' opinions, I started to realize that nothing was going to come of that. So that kind of slowed my roll in like the actually going to the ER, situation. But it did get so bad that I would literally ask my husband, can we just go, take the kid, we had one kid at the time, so take our kid and literally sit in the ER parking lot and just sleep there in the car, because I felt like if something were to happen, at least we're close, right? Because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what could happen. And that's what made me feel safe. It was that bad. I'm sure I'm leaving some things out, but it was literally that bad. And thankfully I was blessed enough to have my husband, who's very supportive, and have my mom, who was at our house like literally 5 to 7 days a week at that point, helping me, taking care of our toddler with me. So I did have a lot of help. And if I didn't, I don't know, like, I think I would have been in the ER a lot more, to be honest. So now between the ER visits and everything else, at this point I was completely homebound. If I had to leave, it was to go to the doctor, and I could not wear my glasses in the car because everything looked so weird. Again, I was definitely not driving, I was passenger, but I would literally cry in the car because I was just terrified. The wind sounded weird, everything looked weird, the trees looked weird, the sky looked weird, like I was terrified. And I remember I would look in my mirror and I would look at my pupils and just nothing looked right, and I would be like, what's wrong with me? My pupils look weird. We gotta go to the ER. My husband's like, we can't go to the ER. Like, let's go to your appointment. Let's get whatever tests we were having done, and then we'll take it from there. So I was home 24/7, and it wasn't like I was comfortable at home. I was having these symptoms chronically. And so when I was at home, I was essentially bedbound because I kind of was just waiting things out, because I guess naturally that's what makes the most sense. If you like get a cut or you get sick, eventually you'll get better. You're just supposed to take it easy, listen to your body, blah, blah, blah. Well, that was literally digging me a deeper, deeper, deeper hole, because now my avoidance level was a 10 and I wasn't able to do anything at that point. So when I was home, I was still having symptoms 24/7. I remember I would walk from my bedroom to the kitchen, which is like from here to here, and I would have a panic attack. And when I say panic attack, I don't mean I'm having all these crazy thoughts and I'm anxious or whatever. I mean, suddenly I'm like, what's going on? Tunnel vision, like, my heart's pounding. I feel like I'm gonna faint, like all that kind of stuff, which again, if you're dealing with it, I don't know how to explain it. So I was having those. I could not go outside. If I would go outside, it would be like the sky felt so overwhelming. It felt like way too big. And I was literally trapped in my house. Like taking a phone call was intense, right? I will say too, I was working at this point. I took off I think it was like a month of work or something, and I work from home. So I was working, but it was really freaking hard. Looking back, I don't even know how I was doing it, but I'm glad that I did, because it did keep some normalcy and it kind of kept me going. Which I work in software sales, and we have some other things going on too, like some, we're Airbnb owners and some little things like that. But I was hanging on by a thread, and I was doing what I had to do to get by. It was pretty tough. So anyway, homebound, unable to really even walk around the house. I was seeing specialists. I don't even know what to name. Endocrinologist, cardiologist, allergist. I was going every direction. Dermatologist. I was like, I have a mole, who knows, maybe it's that or something. Like literally anything you can think, I was going in that direction. Naturopaths, I saw a functional medicine doctor, I saw an actual naturopath, and they put me on a ton of supplements, which honestly at the time just made things worse for me, because then the supplements gave me side effects, which terrified me. And then I got off everything, ended up back in the ER, and kind of started from scratch. So out of all the doctors that I had seen, as far as what was showing up in my blood work was high inflammatory markers, high CRP, just a lot of inflammation in my body. But nothing that the dots could have been connected to. They did dig up some random stuff, like they found a nodule on my adrenal gland, which is something that they're kind of monitoring, but it has nothing to do with this, is like the short version of that. So the more you dig, you'll eventually find some things. But there was nothing that was making sense as to what I was going through. I did have some high cortisol too, which is why they looked at the adrenal gland, but then again, it never like turned into anything. But yeah, nothing that was like a diagnosis. So from here, I got accepted into the Mayo Clinic, which is, if you are not in America, it's like the hospital in America, or like one of the few hospitals that's incredible. Best experience ever. I need to make a video just about Mayo Clinic, but my husband and I honestly had like a lot of fun there. Like, we loved it. It was really cool. It was kind of like a college campus, and if you again are in America, like the way that our health system is, which is better than some countries for sure, but you get an appointment for a specialist, and it's like, okay, in 6 months you'll see this doctor, and then the doctor will order you a scan, which takes a month, and then you'll come back a month later for results, and then a month later, and now it's been like a year. So with Mayo Clinic, you literally have appointments, and you get there at like 8 in the morning, and then you have, 8:05 x-ray, 8:15 blood work, and this scan, and that scan, and this scan, and that scan. And then you meet with the doctors, and you get your results, and you get a consultation same day. So like, I knocked out 20 specialists at that point within a couple days span, which was a huge blessing, and it was incredible. So long story short, with Mayo Clinic, what I got diagnosed with was central sensitization and POTS / dysautonomia. So basically what central sensitization is, it's an umbrella term that holds things like fibromyalgia, and just kind of means like a sensitized nervous system, which actually is exactly what we on this channel kind of like preach as the cure for anxiety. So when I use the term anxiety, it's a sensitized nervous system that pumps out a billion symptoms. So I have to use the word anxiety because that's the word that doctors are going to tell you, that's the word that you'll get diagnosed with, that's the word that people are more familiar with. But it is one and the same with the sensitized nervous system. So that was one. And then POTS / dysautonomia. So for me, I believe that POTS was actually brewing for a couple years prior to this. When I had my first child, I remember having like some purple legs and just some weird things, elevated heart rate. And where this fits into this diagnosis, I would say, is as my nervous system started to desensitize, which we'll talk about next, the POTS also didn't go completely away, but it went like in remission, I guess you can say. So it's kind of like a secondary issue, but at the same time, it's kind of not, because if I get very stressed at this point, I'll get like some more symptoms, but I know how to respond to the symptoms, I know how to desensitize, and then it's a non-issue. So again, I'll get more into that. I want to make a video specifically on POTS because that is like a huge topic in itself, and if people are dealing with that, like, there's a lot to be said. So after Mayo Clinic, and as far as like what to do at that point, I left out a really important part of this story. So prior to falling into the cycle, I was, this is another kind of like red flag that was like showing that my body was so stressed. I had lost my period, like my menstrual period, and I had lost it for like 4 or 5 months, and prior to that I was having miscarriages. I really do believe it was from all the stress that my body was under. And 3 months into falling into the cycle, when I was not driving, I didn't drive for 6 months, and then at that point I was driving like to the mailbox with my husband, so it was a very long time before I was, doing stuff like that. I got pregnant, and it was kind of a miracle, and it was actually a huge blessing for many reasons, but one being that the anxiety kind of convinced me that I was literally dying. Like, I felt like I was in the process of dying, and the pregnancy was kind of like, I took it as God's way of literally being like, no, you have a purpose. At least for 9 months, you have a purpose. Like after everything we had been through with trying to conceive and having miscarriages and everything else, it was like, this is my sign that things are going to be okay, at least for 9 months. So it did kind of like slow me down mentally a little bit with all those like really, really scary thoughts. But anyway, I got pregnant, and I think all that to say is that when it came to Mayo Clinic, I was not able to get some of like the brain scans and things like that I wanted, but because of the pregnancy. But I did get tested for pretty much everything else, and they didn't want to put me on any kinds of like crazy medications because of the pregnancy, which is also honestly a good thing looking back. And they're pretty much just like, you've got to like calm down your body, is like everything in a nutshell. And so they suggested a lot of things that kind of like desensitize you, which we'll get into. So yeah, that's that. The pregnancy, I feel like I need to make another video on that because it's like a really long video in itself, just kind of like how I dealt with pregnancy with all of this going on and childbirth and everything like that, because it's a lot to say. So next topic here, my experience with psychiatry, counseling, medication. I'll go with counseling first because that's the easiest for me to discuss, like shortest, I guess. So I did see multiple counselors. I think it was helpful for me in the sense that it gave me, I was seeing Christian counselors as I'm a Christian, and it gave me like kind of like perspective, like biblical truth that I really needed at that time. Counselors, a lot of times that I was working with, they would kind of go towards the route of like, well, is it trauma? Is it this? Is it that? Like, what's the root of this? When in actuality, I believe, and I preach on this channel, that the root of this is more of like compounded things and like unproductive habits, stress, things like that, unproductive thinking, just generally putting your body through way too much for whatever reason, whether it's trauma, whether it's like whatever. And then getting to a point where your body's like, this is the straw that broke the camel's back. It had nothing to do with the surgery. And here we are. So counseling, again, was helpful in some ways, but it definitely did not cure me, for sure. Next, so psychiatry. I saw a psychiatrist eventually and tried a ton of medication. SSRIs, so like Lexapro, Prozac, things like that. I tried like some new meds. I tried this drug called Auvelity, which is like a new medication. I tried lots of like benzodiazepines, some things like Remeron. I could list medications all day as far as like what we tried. Many of the drugs that I tried for like a day. And then I was like, these side effects are horrendous. There's no way I'm taking this medicine. Or not even the side effects, but I would go online and I would realize this is not worth it. Like, whatever. So that was that. I took Prozac the longest. I took it, I believe, for 10 months. And I had gotten put on that right before pregnancy. And then I got pregnant. It was a safe drug that my doctor told me I could take during pregnancy. And so I decided, I don't know if it's helping, but I am dang sure not gonna rock the boat right now. So I had taken that, and then I ended up getting off of everything following the birth of my second baby, and I ended up recovering drug-free. So as far as drugs go, I made a video on this as well, so check that out. But basically my, non-medical advice, or it's like not advice, my opinion, right? I'm not a doctor. I've got so many disclaimers out there. But my thoughts on this is that obviously, like, listen to your doctor, consult with your doctor, of course, but I would say you could recover with or without drugs, and it doesn't really matter if you're on drugs as far as recovery goes, because you can use them as like a crutch to help you to respond, but at the end of the day, the recovery lies in your response and how you learn how to desensitize your nervous system so that this doesn't happen again, right? So anyway, you can watch my video on that. And then as far as like the psychiatrist goes, it was initially like, okay, yeah, like sounds like anxiety. Let's try this drug. You should be good in like 6 to 8 weeks. You should be much better. Well, I wasn't. Definitely not. Definitely not. So after many months of working with him, he was kind of like, this is like kind of out of my wheelhouse at this point. Like, I don't know. We can try more drugs if you want. I don't know. So at that point, I was just like, let me just get off the meds, see where my baseline's at. I had a lot of weird side effects, And at that point, I didn't know if they were side effects, if it was anxiety, what the heck it was. So I'm glad that I did get off of them personally, because it gave me a chance to kind of like gain confidence and another level of like truly learning how to respond without, you know, not wondering in the back of my mind, well, am I doing better because of meds or not, right? All right, so here's the important part. How did I recover, and where am I now in recovery? So let me answer the second one first. Where am I now? I would say at this point, I am definitely recovered in the sense that I can respond, my life is not limited, anxiety is just not a factor in my life. Symptom-wise, I do still have some symptoms to this day. For example, I still have headaches. Dang headaches. But you know what? It is what it is. And I know that as my body desensitizes, they should go away with time. And if they don't, I don't need to add anxiety to it, right? I can still follow up with my doctors in the normal amount of time that they give me to follow up. Like, you know, say it's a month for my appointment, I don't need to go to the ER. Obviously, unless I have some crazy situation. But I'm not dwelling on it. I'm just treating it like a normal person would, is the best way to put it. In addition to headaches, I would say like some things are still harder for me than others. Like driving at night is still difficult for me, but I can respond and I can do it and I don't say no to it. But it is still tricky. You know, it's not like my life isn't perfectly back to like what it was where I'd never had any of these fears. But again, it's okay, and it's definitely a journey. And I'll say too, my timeline, to be super transparent, I fell into this cycle December 8th, 2021. And I started recovering June 13th, my birthday, of 2022, so like 6 months later or so. And I joined this like basically anxiety mentorship, which is very similar to what we teach now on this channel and in our coaching program. But I joined that, and then between June and the next December, which is when I gave birth, I was doing better. I was driving again, sort of, but I was very, very symptomatic. And then between December and now, I'm at the point where I would say, like, yes, I have symptoms, but like, whatever, you know what I mean? And that's where I would say you get to the point where you are recovered, and it's just a matter of time until the body really decides to get on board completely. So, what did I do to recover? So, like I said, I joined the mentorship, which was basically a 6-month program, and it consisted of like group coaching calls. And so what I liked about these calls, and that's what I do now, is it normalized recovery. Because at the time, I didn't even realize people were dealing with this. I thought that I'd had the worst case in human history, which I still kind of feel that way, like it's so bad. But you know, at the time I was like, nobody's going through this. And then I joined a mentorship that had a ton of people that were going through it. And, you know, and I watched people recover. And prior to that, I was just on all these Facebook groups and Reddit pages and things like that. And I was watching people saying, I had been in this cycle for 10 years, there's no recovery, it just gets worse, your life's gonna be miserable forever, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I didn't really believe in recovery until I joined that. It also gave me accountability to learn how to respond to my symptoms and honestly learn exactly what the heck was going on, because that helped me so much. And the notes I have right here are out of my recovery guide that I made. It's linked in this video. Again, it's free. But in the guide, what we teach you is what's happening. Like, for example, we talk about the nervous system, why we have these symptoms, why our body is releasing adrenaline. What's adrenaline? What does adrenaline do? Why does it cause these symptoms? Like all that kind of stuff, the fight, flight, freeze response. It talks about common symptoms and things like that. And then basically it talks about what to do. So first I would say is understanding anxiety, which again is in this guide. The next thing is putting everything under the anxiety umbrella term, right? Or nervous system sensitization term. So now instead of having a billion problems, we have one problem, and that's that our nervous system is sensitized. So that's that. And then taking responses. So like in our guide, what we teach is called the ideal response. And basically this response teaches you how to kind of like disarm the anxiety. It's not a coping mechanism at all. It's a tool that basically lets you respond in a way that's not going to send more adrenaline and kind of keep you in a vicious cycle. Learning to quit avoiding things, learning to put anxiety in a tag-along terrible backseat driver situation and not in the driver's seat, and really just kind of like taking my life back little by little. So for example, I've got the ideal response on my channel, but basically the ideal response is an acronym that we made up, and it goes I as identify. So when I was feeling these feelings of panic, before I would feel them, I would go back to my room, I would shake and throw up or whatever, and then eventually it would go away, and then 20 minutes later here I was again. So instead I would use ideal and I would say identify. Okay, I'm feeling like I'm gonna pass out, nauseous, dizzy, terrified, whatever, derealized. D would be designate, and I would tell myself, okay, this is anxiety. This is adrenaline, more so. This is my nervous system being sensitized, and that's all that it is. This is normal, this is expected, this is part of the recovery journey. E, embrace, which is similar to accept, does not mean telling myself that I like it and that it's not that bad, because it frickin' sucked and it was that bad. But embracing is more like not fighting, not white knuckling, not adding fear, and just telling yourself, look, these symptoms are what they are. It's just my body processing adrenaline, and the discomfort will not harm me. You know, the only way out of this situation is through it. Yeah, and just pretty much that. And that would kind of differ depending on the situation, but that's embrace. Address is address the task originally at hand. What was I doing? Was I walking to the kitchen? I'm going to go back to walk to the kitchen. L is live your life. That's just kind of like an umbrella, you know, statement. But yeah, so I would use ideal seriously countless times a day, 24/7, back to back to back to back to back, to get me through. And when you think of like your brain and how it works, you know, something that that I think I've talked about on this channel before is kind of the concept of like neuroplasticity, which is a huge term that people like to use these days, and it's actually really important when it comes to anxiety recovery, because our brain gets hardwired towards these thoughts, these reactions, this release of adrenaline, whatever. And you have to like literally wire it in the opposite direction. And there's a book that I recommend in the guide called Winning the War in Your Mind by Craig Groeschel, I believe. And the way he talks about it is he says there's like your brain, when you think of like the neural pathways, it's like when a car is driving through the mud and it kind of like creates these ruts. And so these negative thoughts, emotions, literally your body giving you panic attacks, avoidance, whatever, are these ruts. And so as your body creates ruts, it's literally easier for your brain to think a thought. So it's like, why is it going to take the hard route when it can just take this super easy rut? And to rewire it, you have to do a lot of work, a lot of consistency, a lot of like, honestly, faking it until you make it with your mind, and kind of tricking yourself into believing it. At first, you're not going to believe this. It's just going to be an acronym that you do over and over and over again. And then eventually you'll start to see things change, and you'll start to gain confidence, and you'll start to really believe that this is true. So anyway, you've got these ruts, and you have to rewire them, and he calls them, I think, trenches of truth. And so it's really the same concept as this. So that's how you respond. And as far as everything else goes, I would say it's a lot of like consistent exposure, consistently putting myself in super uncomfortable situations day in and day out. Like once I got comfortable, it was like, well, what's the next thing, right? Like once I got comfortable in my own home, then it was, well, now I have to go walk to the mailbox. Well, now I have to go walk through Target. Now I have to go walk through Target by myself and have my husband in the parking lot. Now I have to drive to Target. Now I have to drive to Target and get out of the car by myself. And it was just this slow progression, but it was literally daily. Like there every single day I was challenging myself. But it was a slow progression of gaining confidence and realizing, you know, even though I felt like I was going to drop dead and have the ambulance call and cause a scene in a grocery store, I didn't, you know, and eventually your body starts to realize, your mind starts to realize, okay, well, you know, we're sending adrenaline, but she's not responding to it, and she does seem pretty safe. And so eventually everything kind of catches on, and it does get easier. And then we have the concept of setbacks. So setbacks, when you think of recovery, it's not this perfect line. Although it does trend in the right direction, if you were to zoom in on a part of recovery, it's going to look like this. Because it looks like this. There we go. All the way down. So you're gonna have ups and downs throughout the entire journey. And what helped me a lot in like the coaching aspect of things is just like really staying on track and staying consistent, because I see a lot of people will start to have some good days and then they'll crash and like, this doesn't work, and they give up. But it's like, no, crashes are expected. And when you realize that, and it's just your body getting back into like homeostasis, it's just your brain learning like, you know, that the pushback isn't needed, you'll start to see like results on, you know, more of a bigger scale when you look back for like 6 months instead of 3 weeks or whatever. So yeah, what the coaching did was really help me stay consistent and really just stay on the right track and not get like derailed by the new latest and greatest cure that I kept looking for many months, the quick fix, going on things like Reddit, which I would recommend to literally never do again. So yeah, I hope this helped. I'm sure that I left out something because this was such a long story and a big part of my life, you know, even the last couple years. But one thing that I'll say too is this channel is here because we, me and BG are believers. And as I was going through this, I'm gonna make a video on this too because it's another long video. But as I was going through this, we met with a lot of pastors. Generally the advice was a lot of pray more, have more faith, or praying over me and being like, do you feel better? Do you feel better now? Let's pray again. Do you feel better now? Let's pray again. How about now? And it really turned me off to, not to God, but like definitely to Christians around me, because it was like, you have no clue what, like you are, that's not it. And then there was the other side of things, which is like the program that I was in, which was more of like the scientific brain science, physiological approach that we teach on this channel, but I could not find the combination of the two. And the closest thing that I found to that was that book with Craig Groeschel, and that was an awesome book. But what we're here to do is kind of combine the two and help people, whether you are a Christian and you have not found this combination, or if you're not a Christian, and you know, we help people of literally all faiths, no faith, whatever, all across the world at this point. But we're here to really just combine those two principles and normalize the fact too that it's like, yes, you know, God could have healed me spontaneously. God can do whatever he wants, right? Super powerful, the most powerful. But, and that's what a lot of Christians are telling me is like, you just need to have more faith that you'll get healed right now. Let's pray for healing right now. And while I think that's great, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I definitely did pray for healing all the way through till the end, there was times where I was so hopeless because I was begging God to heal me, and it was like he wasn't there, you know? And a lot of people could kind of get stuck in that concept of feeling so alone and feeling like, well, what did I do? I've prayed, God hasn't taken this away. And what I want to say about that is, yes, while God can heal spontaneously, God is also not our puppet master, and he cannot go and force us, because we have free will, to make all of these many lifestyle changes, mindset changes, rewiring your brain, the way that it thinks, the way that you respond, your emotional regulation, how much emotional energy you give to certain things, really the whole concept of fear in general. And if I had not kind of learned what I had learned through the recovery journey, I would have ended up in the same boat months, years, whatever later, probably worse at that point, because then I would have thought, oh my gosh, it's just gonna be a cycle for the rest of my life, and I would have been even more hopeless. So by God slowly healing me and walking beside me and giving me the strength that I needed through each day, because if you are alive, God is giving you the strength that you need to get through each day, even if it is the last drop of strength that you have in that day. But God's getting you through that. And I would say, you know, do your best to lean on Him and just trust that this is a good thing, you know? And you might hear that right now and be like, you were crazy, it's not a good thing. But me going through this was honestly one of the best things of my life. The worst thing of my life, for sure. But the skills that I learned and just how much I've changed and my mind has been completely transformed and revamped has been literally invaluable, and I would do it over again to get to where I am. So the Bible says, you know, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that takes a lot of work. You know, not only does it take a lot of work to go against the grain of what the world has to offer, which especially like in the country that I'm in, which I can talk for, America, we are being set up for anxiety. The amount of anxiety is increasing exponentially, you know, between the constant stimulation and the rush and the hurry and everything else that we are offered here. And even to get nitty gritty, you know, things like TikTok or whatever, like we are not meant to have our mind go from this to this to this to this to this to this to this. Like it's literally wiring our brain in the worst way. And so to not conform to this world and renew our minds, we have to literally go against the grain with our thoughts, with our actions, with our energy, with everything. And that takes so much time. To actually break a habit and build another habit takes so much time and takes so much work and so much consistency. And I can pretty much promise you that if you can get through this and you can follow the guide that's linked in this video and get out on the other side, you're going to be such a healthier person, emotionally, mentally, probably physically, because you'll be able to easily adapt to new healthy habits. But I hope this video helped. If you have any questions, please leave them below. I know this was a very long video, but it's long overdue. If there's anything that you are like dying to get the answer to, let me know in the questions below as well, and I'm happy to answer that.